When developing characters for your story, most writers want them to be complex, memorable, even likable people, not flat caricatures that an audience forgets as soon as the story ends. The most common way to attempt this is to sit down with pen and paper and ask your character questions. What does this character want? How old are they? Where are they from? Where are their parents from? What is their sense of humor? How likely are they to make jokes? What is missing from their life? What is their driving goal? Who is their closest relationship? What is their favorite food? What is their earliest memory? What is their dog's name? And on and on and on. These lists of questions are widely available online and are often called character questionnaires. They can be anywhere from 10 to 100 questions long, and you fill out the questionnaire like a student regurgitating facts for an exam. This is not how complex characters are born. I have written 6 novels, and to me, the difference between a character questionnaire and a truly complex character is the same as the difference between telling and showing. Let's take an example. Here is our character, Steve, age 20. Steve is loyal, artistic, and a little withdrawn. He is not very likely to make jokes since he tends to view life very seriously. Because of this, he tends to be overlooked and belittled by his classmates, and he dreams of being able to stand up for himself without getting laughed at. He isn't reckless and refuses to turn into a bully himself despite a lifetime of being picked on. He has one close friend who has stuck by him through everything, but Steve is secretly jealous of his friend, who he views as having everything in his life that Steve himself wants. Oh, and his favorite food is potatoes, and he doesn't have any pets. According to a character questionnaire, this is the beginning of a truly complex character, and actually, I would have to agree. The thing is, though, I have already forgotten almost everything that I just said. Steve, as a character, went in one ear and out the other. He was 20, he likes potatoes, I think he was shy. I mean, that's it. That's all I remember. I was told who he was, but he never came to life as a real, breathing human being. I wasn't shown who he was. To me, as an author, he still feels like a flat sketch of a character, rather than a person that I can follow through the tremendously difficult task of writing a novel. Developing characters via character questionnaires also has the unfortunate side effect of relying too heavily on the answers that you give during the questionnaire. If you're relying on a checklist of traits while writing your story, you can easily fall into the trap of only allowing your character to be who he is on paper. As in, you tell yourself he is withdrawn and unlikely to tell jokes, which might mean when you're actually writing the story, you never let him tell jokes or have a moment of whimsy or spontaneity. Steve becomes a rigid character who never lets his hair out. The same goes for characters whose questionnaire describes them as fun-loving. They can very easily become characters who are never serious or focused in the story, and they get reduced to their archetype of comic relief. By the way, here is Steve. So, how do you develop a truly complex character without using a questionnaire? Here is what I do. Rather than start with a list of questions that can box me in and result in reducing characters to their archetype, I start with the archetype. Then I put the characters in a scene, right from the get-go. I allow the characters to come to life by moving them around in a scene rather than answering questions about their life. Showing versus telling. Usually, I do this by starting with a scene in my novel that I know will have a majority of the main characters present in the scene. They'll all be interacting with each other. It's a scene that I'm confident will end up being in the final story, but it doesn't have to be near the beginning of the story. It's just any scene that I want to include that happens to have many of the main players of the story in it. It's a scene that I'm excited to write and want to include in the story. So, I put the archetypes into the scene, and I play. I move them around. I let them interact with each other and with the world that I have developed, and the story that I'm telling. I get to see who naturally slips into their archetypal world, and who gives me resistance. Who might not belong in this scene or this story, or who might need different traits. I don't worry about sticking to any pre-developed ideas about who each character is. I let them come to life in the scene, willing to change their personalities and backstory and driving goals to fit more naturally within the scene. A risk of using character questionnaires is dedicating so much time to answering the questions that you hesitate to change the characteristics of the character when you're actually writing the story. Maybe you decided the character was going to be withdrawn and loyal, but he actually becomes goofy, or rebellious, or wicked, or delusional, or any other type of person that would more naturally fit into the story that you're telling. If you are married to the character that you created during the questionnaire, you might never let yourself play with who the character could become, and who best fits the story that you want to tell. So now, not only have you reduced your character to an archetype, but he's an archetype that doesn't fully explore the story that you want to tell. In the end, he's a character that feels flat and unmemorable. So, by beginning with archetype, and putting them inside of a scene and letting them interact with each other, I'm not married to any specific trait or backstory. Maybe I have an idea about certain characters. Let's say I want my protagonist to be loyal and have grown up being picked on, but maybe once she gets inside the world of the story, she isn't the timid, careful person that I imagined, but is instead adventurous. And because she has been picked on and has no close relationships, she's willing to go further than any of the other characters in pursuit of her goals. Maybe she becomes reckless or even short-sighted. And the only way I figure this out is by putting her in a scene scene and letting her bump up against the other characters and the world. I find what I actually do, the easiest and least time-consuming way to write a story this way, develop characters like this, is to put your character archetypes into a scene that you know will be in the story. Then, even though you'll probably end up rewriting the scene a few times while the characters come to life, at the end of the exercise, you still have a scene that can actually go in the story that you're writing, rather than a random, unusable scene. But writing like this can also be an exercise that you do before you start writing your story. Maybe you're just developing characters, but you haven't yet developed a world or a story that you want to put them in. Or maybe you're worried about just starting straight out with a scene that you know you want to be in the story, and you're worried about messing it up. Then I think the best way to go about this is to pretend that each one of your characters is the expendable extra at the start of a horror movie, and their only purpose in the story is to show the audience just how evil the monster is. So, you take your characters, either one at a time or all at once, and you plunk them down into the start of a horror movie. Let's say each character only gets, 2 or 3 lines of dialogue before they are eaten by the monster. How do you, as the writer, show the audience that these are people, and not just monster food? How do you get the audience to care? If you can achieve that in this scene, then you will be able to achieve that in the story that you're telling. And you can't rely on the fact that, in theory, your audience won't want people to get eaten by the monster just because, people don't want to get eaten by monsters. That's not how horror movies work. When a person goes to see a horror movie, they expect some characters to get eaten. They actually want that. And right now, you're not working with the protagonist of the horror movie. You're only working with your characters, who happen to be the expendable extras in this movie. The people that will get eaten. That is their only job, and we know that. The audience knows that. The characters probably even know that. So, how do you go about developing these characters into people that the audience will care when they die? Essentially, you're trying to turn expendable extras into the protagonists of their own story, because you will be using them as the protagonists in the story that you end up writing. Even though in this story, their story is only going to be a few minutes long before they're eaten by the monster. So, that is the purpose of this exercise. You don't have a long list of traits and history for each character. You only have the bare bones. Steve, age 20, will be eaten by a monster. That's it. Now, make me care. Let's say the scene takes place on a beach. You've got a bunch of young people hanging out at night, having a good time, not knowing that the demon-possessed body of the groundskeeper is coming to eat them in less than 10 minutes. Your goal is to make the audience, me, grieve Steve's death, even though they just met him and they know nothing about him. So, you get to playing in the scene. Maybe the first time you write it, Steve's hanging out with his friends and having fun, and then bam, gets snatched by behind by the demon boy, and all his friends scream. That's how most horror movies start, and that's about as flat of a character as you can develop. Steve means nothing to the audience. The audience actually wants to see Steve get eaten. So, then you start again. This time, Steve has a backstory. He's just passed the LSATs and gotten into law school, and he's coming to the beach to celebrate. He has dreams of becoming a public defender and helping people like his mom who struggle to get help for their addictions within the legal system. There. Now he's more like a character. He has wants and needs and a history. When he gets snatched by the monster, we might feel a little twinge of loss for him. Or we might feel annoyed that the movie wasted so much time giving us his backstory when he has nothing to do with the story we are actually watching. We are here for the monster, not the wannabe lawyers. So, now you start writing the scene over again. Maybe you're a little annoyed that nobody cares about Steve's dreams, so in your head, he still wants to be a lawyer to help people like his mom. But instead of wasting the audience's time with that, you just keep it as a little something that you know about Steve. And maybe it impacts the way he reacts to his friends or his lines of dialogue. Maybe he's the only one not drinking, but the audience never learns why. It's just something that you, the writer, know about Steve, his familial history with addiction. But in the scene, we don't see that. We see a young man celebrating with his friends on the beach. The scene starts with Steve watching his friends, drunken antics in the water, while he sips soda in the sand by himself. He's watching one of them more closely than the others, and we can tell that even though he's laughing with them and having a good time, he's still set himself apart from them. He wants to impress the girl he's watching, and he's feeling a little jealous that his other friends can impress her so easily while they're all drunk and he's not. But he also feels guilty for being jealous. They're all there to have fun, and he wants to be able to impress his friend while sober without abandoning his desire to avoid alcohol. He wants her to like him, to finally see him the way that he sees her, and we get all of this just by watching him watch her from the shore. Steve is a good guy, and he loves his friends, so he decides to just join them in the water and try to have fun. Maybe one of his friends is pretending to get sucked into the waves in order to make the girls scream. He keeps holding his breath for longer and longer so they'll worry about him before he pops back up to laugh at their fear. The girl Steve wants to impress says something when he joins them in the water. She lightly says that she hates this game and she wishes he would stop. So, Steve decides he'll impress her by pretending to rescue his inebriated friend, cutting off his joke and looking like the hero. When his friend dives under the water this time, Steve dives after him, pretending to pull him back to the shore in a fireman's lift. They tussle underwater. Steve gets his friend over his shoulder, but before they can get to the surface, the monster comes, and the tussle becomes real. None of their friends can see what is happening from the surface. Steve is grabbed by the monster, and his friend tries desperately to free him. He can't die yet. The girl doesn't even know he was trying to stop the game, that he was trying to impress her. But the monster snaps his neck and drags him away. Their friend returns to the surface, alone. See, isn't that more interesting? Doesn't it feel more alive than a list of traits or backstory? Even if you thought the scene itself was cliché or melodramatic, I don't write horror movies. I hope you can see what I'm trying to say here. By putting the basic shell of your character into a scene and letting them interact with the scene, you can allow them to come alive on their own, rather than forcing them to align with a carefully crafted list of traits and backstory. For me, working with my characters in a scene is the only way I ever really feel like I know them. It's how I learn to understand their deepest desires, and see what they'll actually do when they get what they want, and what happens when they fail. That's not something I can dream up in a list. I have to see it happening in action. That sense of life, it can never come from a list of traits for me. I allow myself to go into that first scene knowing that I'll rewrite it a few times. And it's all part of the process. I'm giving the characters time to show me who they are rather than forcing them to be what I tell them to be. It's showing rather than telling. And that is how you bring a character to life.